We are live with another installment of Informed Resistance, which is Public Citizen's Substack, where we try to unpack all the affronts of the Trump administration. We share details of the lawlessness, and we talk about how we are fighting back with great colleagues and allies. Today, we are speaking with Sharita Gruberg, who is Vice President for Economic Justice at the National Partnership for Women and Families. Sharita, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us. So glad to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. There is just so much to say, too much to say about how the Trump administration's policies have been taking us backwards, harming women, workers, families. We're all experiencing it in our real lives. Public Citizen, as you know, we're very multi-issue, so we're thinking about a bunch of different pieces of this puzzle. The SAVE Act, which would make it harder to vote for 69 million women, because if you're married and your name doesn't match your birth certificate, you wouldn't be able to cast a vote. The policies that scale back Medicaid and SNAP through the Trump administration's signature, horrifying, awful achievement, their one beautiful bill, which we call the big ugly bill. Their freezing of, their Title X family planning funding, which of course helps millions of people get affordable health care, just to ICE violence, which is hurting families across the country, to rollbacks of regulations that are hurting workers, and sadly, so much more. A list I could make could go on for hours, but instead, I want to ask you some questions. In particular, I know you have done a lot of work over a long period of time around the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC. I wanted to hear about the horrifying attacks on this agency and what's been going on this term. So if you could start there, and then we'll talk about it a little more.
Oh my gosh, what haven't they been doing? So right out the gate, Trump illegally fired two commissioners, two of the Democrat commissioners. And to back up a little bit, the commission was established by Congress through the Civil Rights Act to really enforce these strong protections for workers, and has over time been strengthened by Congress to ensure that it's able to carry out its mandate. Part of that is a bipartisan slate of commissioners where you have Republican commissioners and Democrat commissioners who have been appointed for a certain amount of time that is intended to cross over various presidents, because it is supposed to be an independent agency that is not dictated by the president's agenda. It's supposed to exist over here for workers independently. Now, Trump, day one, takes a wrecking ball to that, removes commissioners without cause. The Supreme Court just upheld in the Slaughter case his ability to remove folks at independent agencies, which is horrific. But it's a pattern that we're seeing where the Trump administration does something, and then this Supreme Court that has so out of step with where the law is will just allow him to do what he wants and come up behind him and say, no, that was legal the whole time. And so despite 60 plus years of independence of this commission, he decided, nope, it's his. They have to do what he wants. He handpicked a chair because she has indicated that she will follow his orders. She is regularly in touch with his team, and throughout every action of this agency has made it clear that she is there to implement his priorities. And that has taken a number of forms. So some of those include rescinding guidance that doesn't match Trump's vision of what the law is. The sexual harassment guidance that has been in place for years is no more. Now, that doesn't mean sexual harassment is legal suddenly, but what that does mean is workers have less clarity on what their rights are, and employers have less clarity on what their obligations are. One of the key aspects of this guidance that's helpful in today's workforce is clarity around what counts as harassment in tech. So with AI, with social media, this provided some clarity for the modern workforce on what your rights and obligations are. Gone. They rescinded the guidance around affirmative action. Which again, in certain cases is still legal under Supreme Court precedent, They did this again to create confusion. They changed the guidance around national origin discrimination to make it seem that the intention is to protect US born workers from discrimination. And once again, this isn't happening. I want to say really clearly, white workers, US born workers have the same civil rights protections as everybody else. And it had been enforced. However, under this administration, they want it to seem like it's really these US born white workers that are discriminated against en masse, despite years and years of evidence to the contrary. And they are rewriting the guidance and the rules and hand-picking cases to match that. Also, despite Bostock being the law of the land and really clear protections against discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity, the EEOC stopped enforcing protections filed by trans workers. Why? Because Trump said so. Again, supposed to be an independent agency. It's also horrific because years before Bostock, the EEOC led the way saying, of course, gender identity discrimination is illegal sex discrimination in 2012. And now they've done a 180 and said, no, it doesn't matter what your complaint is. If you're trans, we're not taking it up. They've also stopped disparate impact cases. This Trump's, again, supposed to be independent DOJ, no longer independent, issued an Office of Legal Counsel memo, basically implying that what's really unconstitutional is enforcing protections for workers. And so to back up a little bit, disparate impact protections root out barriers that are seemingly neutral policies, but in effect, you see that they're applied in this really unfair way, treating groups unfairly. And this administration said, well, no, that's what's really unconstitutional, is saying that there's something unfair when you can't prove that the company was intentionally trying to advance these unfair practices. So across the board, they've been dismantling things. They just put out their regulatory agenda, their strategic plan, which maps out a number of other ways that they're planning on dismantling 60 plus years of protections. And who are they doing this for? It is the major corporations that are donating to the Trump administration, that are paying for his arch for whatever pet project he has. And in turn, he is making complaints disappear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that last point, the sort of implicit corruption in all of this, it's something we talk about a lot at Public Citizen. We've been tracking dropped enforcement actions across government, looking at the particular contract awards that major companies have been getting. And as you say, complaints that are being dropped are another core part of that puzzle. And in return, we're looking at the fiscal contributions that these companies are making to vanity projects like the Arch, like the ballroom, like the UFC fights, whatever new thing that the Trump administration is interested in doing. It's this horrifying interplay, and really what's at stake. It's people's rights and freedoms and expected protections. I was hoping you could say a little more about the effect this has had. Well, we already know about these bad decisions from the EEOC and this 180 they've done, as you said. What do we know about who's been harmed and how it's starting to play out?
Who's been harmed are U.S. workers. So, for example, the EEOC in FY 2025 only filed 2 racial discrimination lawsuits, an 85% drop from FY 2024.
Wow.
What this means is, you can still hire your own lawyer at your own cost, try to get justice, but it makes a huge difference if it's individual workers having to bear the full financial burden of seeking justice versus this agency. And so we are seeing across the board, workers are the ones being abandoned. Their claims are being abandoned. And again, it's not that the discrimination's not happening. It is, but it's who's advocating for the workers, who's fighting major corporations on behalf of the workers. And under this administration, under this EEOC, they are really leaving these workers on their own. The New York Times just had a story about two high-profile cases that were dropped by the EEOC. One was against Amazon. And it was delivery drivers who weren't able to take bathroom breaks. And there's this absolutely horrific story of one of the plaintiffs who was told, purchase a Shiwi, which is basically like a funnel that you stick to your crotch to pee, into a bottle during her shifts. And so that is horrific. These are cases that really matter. And the COC just dropped it.
Yeah.
Related, the Office of Federal Contract Compliance programs has also been dismantled by this administration. Trump rescinded the 60-year plus executive order requiring taxpayer-funded federal contractors to not only abide by anti-discrimination protections, but to take affirmative steps to make sure they are doing the right thing. And they had a certain degree of oversight that they could do, and they didn't have to wait for a complaint. They could proactively inspect how contractors, again, getting taxpayer dollars, are treating their workforce. And this mattered not just if you were an employee on a contract, but more broadly because 1 in 5 U.S. workers are employed by a federal contractor. So the impacts were huge. Once again, Amazon was on that audit list.
Right.
Suddenly there's no agency, there's no audit list, there's no investigation, there's no proactive oversight into what is happening. And the effects are felt by workers across the country to the tune of millions and millions of dollars, actually billions. We've had millions of dollars that have historically been put back in workers' pockets from winning these cases, but research shows the cost to workers, the cost to the economy of discriminatory treatment and this unfairness that permeates our workforce is to the tune of tens of billions of dollars.
Yes. I believe that. And it's such a hypocritical outcome based on so many of the rationalizations they used for dismantling parts of government or, ending offices, as you just discussed, is, let's deal with waste and fraud and abuse inside government and somehow save us a bunch of money. And not only are they not doing that, but they're actually losing American taxpayers money by ending programs like what you described. So that really resonates and is so appalling. And yeah, just hearing about, Amazon and that behavior is upsetting. I think wondering how you feel the void is being filled, if at all. This private litigation you were talking about, and what more advocacy organizations can do or are doing. I guess paint me a little bit more of a picture for what's been happening as people try to grapple with the realities of the last year and a half, and keep up the fight in some ways against discrimination and these abuses.
Mm-hmm. Well, the reality is the EUC had not been funded for a long time to meet the demands of the workforce. The funding level has basically been stagnant while the workforce has grown. And so Congress has not really equipped them to meet the needs of workers. Now, they've been doing what they can, and it is definitely a lot worse now, but this is a longstanding issue. This Congress has also tried to cut EEOC's funding even further. And in that space where they traditionally haven't been able to keep up with the needs of workers, we've seen states stepping in, state commissions and state civil rights bodies taking up cases and defending folks. We have some organizations that have also been representing folks, especially, with a EEOC that will not take complaints if you happen to be a trans person filing them. We've seen folks stepping up to fill that gap. But the reality is there's just no way private bodies, even state bodies, are going to be able to do the same job as the federal government. There's not making up for the loss of the OFCCP and what they were allowed to do to
Mhm.
proactively hold companies accountable. And so advocates, including the National Partnership, have been pitching a vision for what is not just restoration, but what does it mean to build a civil rights enforcement infrastructure that meets the needs of the modern workforce and can actually be resources and equipped in a way to meaningfully uphold workers' rights. And so we've been pushing hard with our partners for Congress to take action. Um, Congress has been doing some degree of oversight on what this administration is doing. But again, it's been the minority because the majority doesn't seem to have a problem with the expansion of waste, fraud, and abuse that we're seeing. And so it's been a couple prongs of trying to defend people where they are now and trying to uphold rights where they are now, knowing that it's just not going to be the same, or we're not going to be able to meet those needs in the same way. And then also proactively looking forward to what the rebuild needs to look like. And we really do need to invest in upholding civil rights. It's still a value, it's still a need, and it's still incredibly important to workers.
Yes. Yes. Well, you said a number of important things in there, so I want to pick up on a couple threads. I think, there is the importance of this on its face. It's important for people to protect them. Civil rights protections are expected, and we should be able to deliver as a government. But also, you were talking about the sort of economic impacts of this, economic justice, as is your title. There's a huge tie to protecting people in the workforce, and then having workers who produce and do what we need for the economy. So I would love to ask you about the proactive vision that you were saying you all are cooking up, and sort of how these two pieces fit together. What we want if we have a governing moment, if we have an opportunity, even if we have an intervening moment where either the House or the Senate or both flips and we can do oversight. What's the perspective of the partnership of sort of what we want to see? What's the track ahead?
Of course. I mean, first off, definitely oversight and accountability. We have seen this administration, this EEOC, not fulfill its duties to taxpayers, to workers, to hold companies accountable for following the law. And so we really need Congress to step in and hold the administration accountable for what it's failing to do.
Mhm.
I think that is step one, is a real reckoning of what harms have been caused, what that's done to workers, what that's done to our economy, and what we need to do to turn things around. And then the minute we have the ability to advance these proactive policies, we need to do that. We need to fund the EEOC at the level that it needs to be funded to meet the needs of the current workforce.
Mhm.
Currently there are 23% fewer employees at the EEOC than at the start of the administration.
Yeah.
And again, even before that, Congress had been bleeding it dry. And so we need to really fund it to do its job, to be able to go toe to toe to with these major corporations and hold them accountable for making sure that they are creating fair workplaces. We also need to restore the OFCCP. Um, it is just unacceptable that this much federal money goes to contracts with private companies without oversight to make sure they're following the rules. And again, the EEOC, they kind of just said, oh, you take care of it, without giving them the capacity or the resources to do that. Again, we have a lot of federal contractor entities to oversee. OFCCP never had the resources to fully, they did what they could. They did an amazing job, but it's 200,000 plus entities
Right.
with just a tiny staff. So rebuild it, make sure they have the authority to affirmatively enforce these protections, do the oversight necessary, because at the point where you're getting a complaint, it's often pretty late. You want to make sure that the companies, especially companies taking taxpayer dollars, are doing the right thing, are fair workplaces long before a complaint comes in. And so a new OFCCP would need to be structured in a way and resourced in a way where they're able to really do that.
Mhm.
And again, since 1 in 5 workers are at these contracting agencies, it's going to have a much bigger impact on fairness in U.S. workforces across the country. So those are some of the big things that we need right away. Also, next administration, one of the priorities is going to have to be rescinding 2 Stephen Miller sponsored OLC memos. Why? That man's not a lawyer. I don't know why he gets to tell the Office of Legal Counsel at the Department of Justice what to do,
One of the many mysteries of this administration.
but they listen to him. And there are like 2 horrific ones that just came out. The disparate impact one, the idea that it is unconstitutional to prevent discrimination is, in response to discrimination, is just ludicrous. That needs to go. And then he also authored another memo, which we don't talk about as much in this space, but um, workers with disabilities have also been really screwed over by this administration. Another law that the OFCCP was charged with enforcing were protections to make sure disabled workers were not discriminated against. Um, who knows who's enforcing that right now? The president's budget has some new civil rights office he wants to put in the Department of Labor that is not funded, does not exist. And again, the amount that he is allocated for this is laughable. So disabled workers at taxpayer-funded federal contractors are currently, we just don't know what's happening because this administration has taken away the tools to provide that oversight and accountability. This EEOC is not really upholding their rights. And then again, Stephen Miller got OLC to issue a memo, basically making it easier to institutionalize folks with disabilities, which is, again, beyond horrific. And so we see these patterns of people this administration doesn't think should be full and fair participants in our society. And they are changing the way that they enforce our civil rights laws to make this a reality. And their vision is one where women, people of color, disabled people, queer and trans people are not immigrants are not part of our society, and that is repugnant. And we really need a rebuild that centers the folks that have been excluded by this administration.
Yes. That's such a good and important comment. I think, as we look and hope towards this post-Trump moment, which will come, thinking about how to build again in a way that doesn't just accept any new norms that have been established, but move us to a place where people are protected, where workers have what they need, where people are treated fairly, where women and families are not marginalized. There's a lot to do is what I'm taking away from your comments here. Okay, well, I know we could talk about this endlessly, but I am going to end us here. But before I do, I want to thank you so much, Sharita, for joining us. And then want to ask you to tell our listeners, our watchers, where they can find out more about you and your organization.
Of course. Well, thanks so much for having me on. I could talk about the EEOC all day. We didn't even get to how ludicrous it is that Justice Clarence Thomas swore
Yes.
in the current chair. Just to give you a sense
Thank
of
you for flagging. Yeah.
where she's aligned and who she's following. But really appreciate the opportunity and love the work that Public Citizen does to root out the waste, fraud, and abuse in this government. If you want to know more, you can visit us at nationalpartnership.org. Also on Instagram, on LinkedIn. Check us out and really appreciate the support.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you. We love working with you all as well. For everyone watching, please subscribe if you're not yet to this Substack, Informed Resistance. We're going to be updating you continuously on fronts like what we talked about today, what this administration is up to, what it means for all of us in our daily lives, and how to challenge it, and also how to plan for when we get past it. So thanks, everybody. We will talk again next week. Thanks all.